Democrats simply don't have the cold-heartedness necessary to see people suffering and just say, let them eat cake.
Yeah, but then
they are not the types that
they voted repeatedly to do it. I mean, you just heard Democrats
and what
on
was Donald Trump doing in the meantime?
He doesn't have a vote in the legislature.
No, he's the president of the United States, the most powerful president with Republicans in my lifetime, Scott.
You know, anytime you see Anna Navarro and Scott Jennings on the same panel, you already know the temperature is going to rise. And that's exactly what happened here. Before a single policy point even hits the table, you can feel the tension because debates about shutdowns aren't abstract. They touch paychecks, services, and real families trying to get through the week. What stood out right away is how this panel reflected the bigger political divide in the country. One side talking about impact and responsibility, the other side trying to spin the blame. And moments like this matter because they tell you not just what politicians think, but how they choose to talk about people who are directly affected. So as we walk through what each person said, it's worth asking, are they giving honest analysis or just defending their side storyline? All right, let's break this down together.
Who you ask, 7 Democrats and 1 independent joined Republican senators and just voted to end the shutdown. The deal still needs, of course, to pass the House, but it will fund the government until the end of January. It will not, however, extend health care subsidies. That will be set for a date for a vote at a later time to extend those subsidies potentially in December. Some major backlash is emerging inside the Democratic Party. Those 8 senators are defending their vote now.
This was the reality. SNAP recipients suffering, nothing happening on ACA. So from suffering and no path, we've now got robust benefits and a path.
Staying in a shutdown mode was not getting us anywhere.
If the battle plan isn't working, you change the battle plan. You try another tactic, especially if what's happening is danger to your troops.
It's like, take the win. You know, we had an election and it went well on Tuesday. You want to overplay your hand.
But there are plenty of Democrats who disagree with those sentiments. For example, J.B. Pritzker says it wasn't a deal, but an empty promise. Congressman Seth Moulton said caving now makes no sense. California Governor Gavin Newsom called it pathetic and says America deserves better. Senator Chris Murphy added submission emboldens the tyrant. And Congressman Ro Khanna says Chuck Schumer is no longer effective and needs to be replaced. And then you have Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying working people want leaders whose word means something. We have Congressman Jim Clyburn here at the table tonight. His new book comes out tomorrow. It's titled The First 8. I have a copy of it here with me. I will have you sign it later. We will get to the book in just a bit. Sure. But first, this argument between Democrats. And I guess the big question is, if you didn't get the one thing that you were holding out for, what was it all for?
Well, I think we saw some things that we have not talked about that did happen. We saw what has happened with SNAP. I think that came out of this. What is happening with WIC, Women, Infant, and Children programs. So some things did happen. Now, on this particular issue, I think that's a real problem because you say you change your tactics. What are you changing to? It's a little bit like me hearing from my Republican friends, as I've been hearing for years, that we've got this plan. What kind of health care plan you have? They've never put one on the table. So if you got a new tactic, what's the new tactic? That's what causes me some pause about this plan. Now, if you promise a vote, is the vote on a bill or is the vote on the procedure? If you're promising me a vote on the bill, that means you're going to give me the 13 votes that you've got that I can get past the 60-vote filibuster. Now, if you're doing that and you will allow a direct vote, then I may have some consideration for it, because I do believe if you get to the 51, there are 2 or 3 Republicans that see the value in these tax credits.
Of the subsidies. Would you have voted along with the 7 Democrats that voted to go ahead and reopen the government and say, okay, you know what, we're not going to worry about the health care subsidies right this second. We just want to get this over.
Absolutely not. Not from what I've seen. They may know something I don't know. It may be that they have a promise for 13 votes to get beyond the filibuster. I have not heard that. If they had that kind of a promise, that's one thing I might take a look at. But if they don't have that as a promise, absolutely not. I would not vote for this.
Scott, I'm going to let you jump in here. But first, I want to let everyone hear from the Speaker of the House, who Jake Tapper talked to about this very issue, about whether or not this was going to be a vote, guaranteed vote, before the ACA subsidies end up ending. Let me let you hear what Mike Johnson had to say.
Would you bring it up?
Well, the bill that's going to pass
to extend the subsidies, that later vote.
I can't commit to anything that hasn't even passed through the Senate yet.
Will you have a vote on the issue as your 13 Republicans, frontline Republicans, people that you're the speaker because of them?
Yes.
They're in districts that are vulnerable. Sure. Will you have a vote so they can vote?
The very people that you were citing in the letter believe we have to have real reform.
So you're not committing to bringing up a bill that deals with the Obamacare subsidies before they expire?
I'm not committing to it or not committing to it.
He's not committing to it or not committing to it. And this is the very thing that Democrats were afraid of, that if they capitulated, that the subsidies would not be dealt with. How do you respond to that? There are a lot of people worried about how expensive their health care is about to get.
Yeah, first of all, Congressman, congrats on your book. Honored to be with you tonight. Second, look, one thing that came out of this entire fight is that the healthcare system in this country has been, Obamacare, has been exposed as a complete and utter failure. We all know it now. Everybody admits it. The other thing that came out is that Democrats are willing to make people suffer. And you heard Democrat after Democrat today say, well, we just couldn't prolong the suffering. So they admit that their political tactics were designed to inflict suffering on the American people. We also learned about cynical politics in this. But the overall issue of health care is going to have to be dealt with because the system has failed. Everyone, I think it's bipartisan now, admits it. But I'm not sure that having Mike Johnson commit to giving billions of dollars to insurance companies for insurance that's not getting any better, it feels like it's getting worse to the American people, is going to make a difference. I could see Democrats and Republicans coming together to discuss that, like if we're going to spend this amount of money, should we be just giving it to insurance companies or should we be doing something else with it that would actually have a chance of making it feel like you could get seen by a doctor and get a better health outcome? But what we're doing now, writing checks to health insurance companies.
You know, moments like this really show you the difference between political noise and political responsibility. Because underneath all the heated language and back and forth, there's a simple truth. For more than a decade, Republicans have insisted the Affordable Care Act is broken, but they've never put a real replacement on the table. And that's not a partisan talking point. That's just history. 15 years, multiple elections, unified government, and still no plan. Not even a framework. So when commentators like Scott Jennings go on television and declare the ACA a failure, it's worth asking the obvious question. Failure compared to what? If there's a better idea, where is it? Why hasn't anyone presented it? Why hasn't it ever been scored, debated, or even shared with the public? That's not policy work. That's political theater. And voters can tell the difference. And the shutdown makes that contrast even sharper. While federal workers were lining up at food banks and families were feeling the strain, the leadership that could have stepped in to end the crisis didn't. The president at the time wasn't calling lawmakers back to the table, wasn't negotiating, wasn't trying to bridge the gap. The reality is, governing requires empathy, not showmanship. And empathy was in short supply during that stretch. Democrats aren't perfect. They miscalculate, too. They argue internally, sometimes loudly. But at least there's a moral through line, an instinct to minimize harm rather than weaponize it. You hear it in the way they talk about suffering. You hear it in how uncomfortable they were with the idea that ordinary people were paying the price for political gridlock. That kind of discomfort isn't weakness. It's humanity. And that humanity is exactly why the blame for the shutdown didn't land even. People watched who was trying to solve the crisis and who was trying to score points from it. They saw which party kept talking about real-world consequences and which party kept talking about strategy. And they saw a contrast between compassion and calculation. So when someone tries to flip the script and argue that Democrats were the ones prolonging suffering, it's important to go back to the record. Who had the power to end the shutdown? Who refused to commit to preserving healthcare subsidies? who declined to lead. Those answers aren't partisan, they're on tape. And sometimes clarity is all you need.
America saw, particularly people who were directly impacted and suffering, is they saw that Donald Trump does not give a damn. While people were going hungry, while federal workers were making lines that went round blocks, he was in Mar-a-Lago golfing or hosting lavish parties with seafood towers and caviar and champagne. Not at one point did he say, we have got to convene, I'm going to lead, I'm going to put Republicans and Democrats in a room around a table, like he did with Palestinians and Israelis, and we're going to craft a deal. We are all Americans and we have to figure this out. No, I mean, he just completely abdicated his duty to lead. And when he wasn't hosting a Great Gatsby party, he was giving $40 billion of U.S. taxpayer money to Argentina to bail out those people. Doesn't sound very America first to me. And so I think that put a light on the kind of precedent that people voted for.
Scott, with all respect, you cannot put on the American people that Democrats were the one that were hurting people, making this plight.
Who was casting the votes against opening the government? Democrats or Republicans?
Who was
casting the votes?
Scott, who was wanting to cut SNAP benefits?
Nobody.
And who was playing up SNAP benefits after 2 courts ruled that it was unallowed?
Republicans voted to fund SNAP 15 times. Democrats voted to defund it 15 times.
You talk about the Affordable Health Care Act. Okay,
it's terrible.
Landmark legislation is not perfect. We understand that Democrats, Republicans, independents, 70% of Americans, not Democrats, not just independents, 70% of Americans believe that they should increase those subsidies past the dead mark of December, the COVID era subsidy benefits. So it's a huge, huge thing that Democrats, Republicans, 70% agree with. And look, when it comes to the government shutdown, I was of the persuasion that to go for it, I didn't really get it. Democrats wanted a fight. They got a fight. Chuck Schumer, back in last year, didn't fight. He got a lot of flack for it, particularly in his home state of New York. So they wanted a fight, but they found a fight that was worth fighting with talking about the Affordable Health Care Act. People were with them. Democrats were leading in the polls. We won big on Tuesday.
That's what it was for, right? It was for the election, right?
Well, I think we should have kept going. What I don't understand, and which I would love others to help me out understand, I don't understand why we caved so soon when the American people seemed to be on our side.
Because the election ended. You just said it. It was for the election.
Listen,
the election ended.
I know a lot of Republicans. I know a lot of Democrats. They're cut from different cloths. Democrats simply don't have the cold-heartedness necessary to see people suffering and just say, let them eat cake.
Yeah, but then
they are not the types that
they voted repeatedly to do it. I mean, you just heard Democrats.
And what was Donald Trump doing in the meantime?
He doesn't have a vote in the legislature.
No, he's the president of the United States, the most powerful president with Republicans in my lifetime, Scott. He never once even told them, come back to Washington.
We just played Democrat.
You guys have been out of Washington for a month and a half.
Correct.
A month and a half.
We just played Democrat after Democrat admit that the Democratic plan to prolong the shutdown was causing, quote, suffering. That was their words, not mine. Democrats themselves realized the tactic of suffering was no longer something they could personally stomach. That was their party, not Republicans.
Only 7 Democrats voted for this.
8.
Not Democrat after Democrat. No.
He caucuses with the
There were
Democrats.
7.
Don't split hairs. He caucuses with the
And you're absolutely right. You're right.
Exactly.
Democrats did fold because Trump was wagering the American people's health, safety, and food security on politic games. The Democrats, the one silver lining I see that we can be proud of as Democrats is we folded.
You know, what Anna Navarro said really gets to the core of this whole debate, because at some point, politics stops being a strategy game and becomes a question of basic compassion. And that's the dividing line we keep seeing in these shutdown fights and these healthcare battles. One side is focused on how real people are living, and the other side is focused on how their donors are feeling. That's not a partisan insult. That's the pattern we've watched play out for years. And isn't it telling that after more than a decade of criticizing the Affordable Care Act, not a single detailed replacement plan has ever been introduced? Not one. If the ACA is truly as broken as Republicans say, where is the alternative? Where's the roadmap? Where's the policy that lowers costs or expands coverage? It's never presented because it's never been created. And the American people feel that every time premiums rise or access gets harder, that's why Navarro's point hits so hard. When the pressure is on, you can see who actually wants to govern. Democrats weren't perfect in this fight, but at least there was discomfort around the idea of people suffering. That discomfort is a moral instinct, not a political flaw. And it's something our system desperately needs more of, not less. But compassion alone isn't enough. There's a growing sense among voters, and honestly, among many Democrats themselves, that the party needs to fight with more clarity and more urgency. Not to mimic the cruelty or chaos of their opponents, but to match the intensity, because we're in a moment where rights, healthcare, and democratic norms aren't just being debated. They're being stress-tested, and hesitation comes with a cost. So when we talk about shutdowns, healthcare subsidies, or basic governance, the question isn't who yelled the loudest on TV. The real question is, who showed up for people who needed help? Who actually tried to lead? Who treated this like public service instead of political theater? Once you ask those questions honestly, the picture becomes very clear. And that's the lens we have to carry forward, not left versus right, but leadership versus performance. Humanity versus indifference. Democracy versus convenience. Thanks for watching Civic Current. Stay informed, stay thoughtful, and stay engaged.